Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast with Kate Riga. We've got a full plate today, a lot of different things we're going to talk about. There were these big oral arguments before the Supreme Court yesterday about this case with Mifepristone, which is the key abortion drug. And well, what makes that so important is that that has become the way that most women induce abortions these days, and obviously because it can now be mailed. Because if you're in a red state that bans abortion, you can do a telehealth appointment with a doctor and get this drug mailed to you. That, in addition to just the convenience that would be the case, even if we didn't have all the politics of abortion rights in this country, convenience, privacy, don't have to go to a clinic, all that kind of stuff. It's obviously a much bigger deal post Dobbs, because it creates this kind of backdoor for a key part of reproductive rights, even post Dobbs. So we had oral arguments before the Supreme Court about that. I don't want to since Kate has been following this litigation. God, it seems like it's upwards of a year now, and she was listening to the oral arguments. I don't want to get too much into that. We've got a bunch of Trump trial stuff, and then we've also got this what are for now kind of smaller issues. We now have Andy Kim, Representative Andy Kim, who, he's not senator elect yet, but New Jersey is a pretty strong Democratic state. So that seems like that's probably going to be the case. And he seems to have struck a pretty big blow against machine politics in New Jersey. And this isn't about one party or another. It's just the structure of politics in that state. So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, after we're seeing maybe some signs of some movement in the presidential race, in the general election. Some more positive polls for Biden. Too soon to say that there's anything major happening, but there's some hints of it. So we will talk about that. What I wanted to talk to you first, though, is, remember last week I told you that we are now running our annual TPM membership drive. We do this once a year. It is really, really important. We are trying to sign up 1,000 new members during this drive. Yesterday was 1 week since we started this year's drive, and we are up to 561 new members as of this moment. I'm looking at the little what is it, not the bat they used to call it, the sort of the little the ticker for how many new members we've signed up. So we are past half of our goal, which is fantastic. In the nature of these things, you sign up the most people at the beginning of the drive. That's just kind of human nature, how it works. But the fact that we are more than halfway to our goal after 1 week, that's really good, and we really, really appreciate it. And I just want to remind you that you see all these headlines about websites, news organizations laying people off, just closing down altogether. I sometimes discuss issues in the news business, because, well, I mean, I've been involved with this site for going on 25 years, but I ran it pretty much, the business part of it, I ran it pretty much myself until just a few years ago. So I learned a lot about how the media business runs, and why there are these challenges in it. And as I have discussed with you many times, the reason TPM still exists is because of our membership program. If you looked at basically the total amount of revenue that TPM brings in isn't that different than it was upwards of a decade ago. Not exactly the same, but fairly close. But if you looked at sort of the internal spreadsheets and charts, if you looked upwards of a decade ago, it wouldn't be, we started our membership program in 2012, so it wouldn't be 100% advertising, but it would be pretty close. It would certainly be over 90% of our revenue for from advertising, and over that period that has flipped. Now about 90% of our revenue comes from membership dues. So you, the TPM reader, and especially the TPM reader member, are critical. It's not some, this isn't, we're not just like puffing you up, right? I mean, you are critical to why we are still here. And it's not just, still here, kind of hanging on or whatever. This is why, in many ways, ironically, given all the things that have happened over the last quarter century in the digital news business, now TPM is a place where, we're not huge, we're not fancy, but like, our employees can be pretty confident we're not going anywhere, right? We have a very stable business model, and that's what you make possible. And we're about to talk to Kate about this mifepristone case that she has been on. Again, when we talk about it, she'll tell us exactly when it was first filed. It feels like it's upwards of a year ago. She has been on this case starting in, when they brought it to this kind of ringer, a federal trial court judge down and out Amarillo, Texas. Each stage of this, that takes a lot of time. And of course, Kate is on the both on the broader courts beat at TPM, also on the reproductive rights beat at TPM. So here, these two things come together on this on this case. But these take a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. And your membership, that's what it makes possible. And you have I don't know, a couple months ago, you had those Chesbro docs series that Josh Kovensky did. You have the other one he did about this Christian nationalist secret society, another big exclusive with a big trove of documents. You've got the reporting that Josh Kovensky and Hunter Walker did on the George Santos stuff. This great story that Hunter did. Another big exclusive on Sarah Sanders, governor of Arkansas. How'd she manage this big 6-figure jaunt to the Super Bowl? So, my point here isn't to tell you every big exclusive we've had over the last few months, but your memberships do that. So if you're a member, fantastic, thank you. I'm just here to praise you, not to guilt you at all. But maybe your membership lapsed. It's a good time to come back. It's just a few bucks a month, and you become part of our team, become part of our club. Maybe you've never been a member. It's also a good time. And I will point out this. It's great to support what we do. You get a lot of benefits and everything. There are some people who do not have the means to pay even this relatively small amount. We've got a special program for people in that case. We'll give you a free membership, because we don't want anybody to be in a position. I mean, if you're saying like, oh, I subscribe to this, that, and the other, TPM isn't my thing. Well, we're fine letting you hit the paywall. But if you really like TPM and you'd like to be a member, but things are tight or you're on a fixed income, we will give you a free membership. So when you subscribe, that's part of what you're doing. You're helping pay for a system where we make sure there's no one who is boxed out of getting access to everything we publish because of their own financial situation. We also have free memberships for registered students, full-time students, part-time students. A lot of lower income people can't afford to be full-time students. So we've got free memberships for them too. So that's what we do. If you are a listener to this podcast, if you're not a member, please consider signing up sometime over the next few days. Just go to the website talkingpointsmemo.com, and again, you'll see little banners and everything asking you to sign up, because it's our sign up drive. So before we get to the news, Kate, what is you are you are a working journalist doing all the reporting stuff. Now you've been with TPM for several years, but just from, tell us some of the TPM gospel, as long as we're in membership drive week.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke that if I worked anywhere else from TPM, I would have been laid off already. The fact that I haven't been is such a rarity in the industry. Um, and yeah, I mean, we do this spiel whenever we do the membership things, but the thing that I like about TPM and working here is the closer relationship with the readers than you get at a lot of other publications. And, the fact that we get tips from readers or insight from people who have worked in the industries that we're covering. And, when we say TPM is small, like I don't know that people realize how small we are. It's what we've got, like 4 or 5 reporters. It's tiny. And so we cover like a broad spectrum of things, just kind of issues that we feel we can add to, that we wouldn't just kind of be replicating the mainstream take on, that we have unique insight and the TPM kind of angle to bring to it. And because of that, there is reliance on experts and outside ideas, and all that kind of stuff kind of synthesizes as we're forming our editorial perspectives and figuring out like what people don't know and what hasn't been covered and everything. So within that kind of ecosystem, our readers and listeners and members are even more important, because we are just trying to not just kind of walk party lines or do what everyone in the mainstream media is doing. And that takes more work, as you say, and it also takes more a diversity of perspectives and doing kind of information gathering from unorthodox places and everything like that. So our members have always been the engine of TPM. That's no different now. And I said this last episode, but particularly at this moment where the journalism industry has just never looked so bleak and so unstable. It's an unbelievable peace of mind to have that I can, do journalism that I always wanted to do without being in daily worry that I'm just going to lose my livelihood, as soon as we run out of venture capital or a billionaire gets kind of tired of bankrolling the company. So TPM is a special place for both those like behind and front of the scene reasons. So, if the spirit moves you to sign up, there are really tangible results. It's going to pay our salaries and the other kind of boring mundane things that just keep us humming. So we appreciate it, and it's uncomfortable to ask for money, so I appreciate you bearing with us and realizing that this is a necessary evil we have to engage in.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I actually got asked yesterday to do a Zoom talk with a class at a journalism school. And it was basically because, as I said, I write a lot about the journalism industry, and they had seen something I'd written, and the idea is to kind of discuss with these students, you know, the state of the journalism industry, and how can they succeed in it, or how when it looks so bleak. And I've been thinking about what to say, and part of me is like, you, I'm sorry, unfortunately we don't have any open positions at TPM right now, so like, I'm not sure what I can tell you, but in all seriousness, it does make a difference. And I will, I sit in a different place than Kate does, obviously, in the organization. But I will say this, that when we were 100% advertising based, If you're a big media organization, you tend to have relationships with advertisers. So, like, if you're the New York Times, I don't know if Macy's is. I mean, Macy's, that's old school, but they've got a bunch of places. These are our advertisers, and you need to kind of keep working with them to keep them in the fold and all that stuff. But as a small organization, as a small news outlet, you're always on the edge. So you don't really have any advertisers. You've got to go out and kind of convince them, again each year. And I will tell you, I mean, obviously it's not the same thing as job security exactly. In some ways it feels even more existential, but the stress that I experienced when we were advertising based was so much greater. I can't even begin to describe it to you, than it is now with the membership model, because basically we would go into each year. I would go into each year, since it was that the business side of the organization was my responsibility. You have a between $2 and $3 million budget, and you actually don't have any of that money spoken for. That's really scary, right? Whereas with memberships, you actually know, you basically know where almost all the revenue is coming from on January 1st. Now, we're doing this drive, we have to do this, that, and the other. It doesn't mean it's easy, but in the near term, you have a lot more ground under your feet. And the reason I mention that here is that sense of having ground under your feet, that pervades the whole organization, right? Everybody can feel that. Everybody feels that, maybe it indirectly. So anyway, all reasons why this is an important thing. If you're not a member, please take a moment to sign up, and maybe even learn a little about the news business and our extended monologue here. So, like, let's see the results of the righteous actions of all of our members. Let's talk about this mifepristone thing. What did we see from the Supreme Court, Kate?
So here's the thing. Everyone across the board knew that this case was like pretty stupid. I mean, fundamentally, the plaintiffs are this loose coalition of anti-abortion doctors, some of whom are retired, some of whom are dentists. Like, it's just this kind of hodgepodge of people they could find that incorporated in Amarillo shortly after Dobbs, clearly chasing this trajectory of, going to Matthew Kacsmaryk, getting a friendly opinion from him, going to the Fifth Circuit, getting a likely friendly opinion there, and then going to the Supreme Court, which is what happened. But a part of this kind of judge shopping pipeline that these right-wing litigants keep using is that the cases that are making it up to the Supreme Court are stupid, are bad, are just like flawed in these fundamental ways that they never should have reached that stage. And this case is such a prime example of that, because to bring a lawsuit, you have to have standing, right? You have to be able to prove that you have an injury from, in this case, the FDA's action to lift these restrictions on mifepristone. And the anti-abortion doctor's argument is, well, maybe a woman will be suffering enough from complications with mifepristone that she will come to the emergency room and I'll be the only doctor on call and I will have to complete the abortion, right? I will have to end a viable pregnancy, which is against my religious conviction. And that's my injury. And that's why initially the FDA should get its authorization of mifepristone yanked altogether. It should be taken off the market. That's their kind of best case scenario. Now, the problem is they weren't able to show in any of the declarations of the doctors who are the plaintiffs that they've ever had to do this before. They can at best rustle up like truly one or two stories of women having, adverse reactions or heavy bleeding or something like that after, after getting an abortion and kind of coming in. But even then, they can never prove that, they actually ended a pregnancy kind of rather than treating these side effects. And some of the cases are so muddled. It's like, oh, it wasn't actually me, it was my partner, which is so, further attenuated. And I mean, beyond that, that's not enough, right? They also have to be able to prove that the specific kind of lifting of restrictions on mifepristone is what led to that injury in the first place. And now the problem is Kasmerick was fully willing to say, yeah, let's yank the FDA authorization. The Fifth Circuit kind of grudgingly admitted, okay, that happened over 20 years ago. Unfortunately, like we are beyond the statute of limitations there. But luckily, these lifting of restrictions in 2016 and 2021 in the ballpark. So we're okay with that. So now the plaintiffs have to show that not needing to go into the doctor 3 times before you get a mifepristone prescription or getting it mailed to you. That's what's causing these adverse effects. And they're just so far from being able to show that. So much of their argument kind of lies in this probabilistic land of like, maybe one day we'll have to do that. And that would be untenable. And then, so kind of on top of that house of cards, you also have the idea that there are federal conscience protections already in place for anti-abortion doctors who can say, I don't believe in this, I won't do it, and that's fine. Like those are already part of the system. So it's clearly just it's silly. Like it's an impossible case for them to make. And this was really kind of came out in oral arguments, particularly when, you know, the kind of bipartisan dog pile started, and the anti-abortion doctor in this case, this was her big first oral argument for Erin Hawley, the wife of Senator Josh Hawley, who's been behind a lot of this anti-abortion litigation. And Ketanji Brown Jackson was talking about, okay, even putting aside this kind of really dubious standing, which got a lot of airtime in the argument, she was like, on top of that, what you basically have is a handful of doctors who say we don't ever want to be forced to perform abortions. Yet the remedy they're looking for is to make mifepristone some degree, if not totally inaccessible for the entire country. And she was like, how in the world is that possibly proportional? Like the natural thing to do here would be to maybe reinforce the idea that this handful of doctors has exemptions in place, that they'll never be put in this situation. But for the whole country, making mifepristone hard to access, like that's pretty plainly ridiculous. And then you had Neil Gorsuch jump in, which is interesting because that might immediately strike you as kind of odd bedfellows. But Gorsuch has been honestly consistently the loudest voice on the court saying that this rash of like national injunctions, this idea that these right-wing litigants kind of just have to rustle up a couple people to say, oh, we have an injury. And then these Kaczmarek-y judges will say, and that's good enough to block this federal court action for the whole country. Gorsuch has repeatedly said, like, this is inappropriate. This isn't how it's supposed to work. There's been a rash of this and it's not okay. And as we talked about on a previous pod, the judicial conference is now kind of cracking down on it. But he jumps in too and says, like, this is crazy. This remedy is just out of hand. This is not how it's supposed to be. And then John Roberts jumps in and is like, yeah, plus, are you content, Erin Hawley, if we say we'll give relief to these handful of doctors, right? Like they will not be put in this situation. Don't worry. And of course, she can't answer that truthfully because this case is not about the kind of supposed qualms of a few anti-abortion doctors. I mean, it's obviously about trying to get mifepristone restricted to, cut down on medication abortions, which, as you said, Josh, is the most common kind. And it's just, another step in the battle of banning medication abortion nationwide, so it puts her in this like impossible situation. And that is kind of the thrust of how the arguments went. Like there are so many soft points in her argument, that it just became You had Alito kind of doing what he usually does, appointing himself an additional attorney for the anti-abortion side and kind of working that angle. But by the time Hawley got up to the stand, like the fight had kind of gone out of him too. He wasn't even really talking anymore. I mean, when you have Clarence Thomas asking kind of skeptical questions, you've lost. Like this one is just out of hand. This case is just too stupid for even this Supreme Court case to be, for this court to be like, yeah, this is good. This holds legal muster.
This is one of the things about standing, and standing can often and sometimes is this highly technical issue where you think, okay, there's the issue of substance here. We that we need to decide, and this standing issue is kind of a technicality that you're using to dodge or something. But this is an example of why standing of why the whole standing part of the law exists, because it creates if it is treated in a serious way, it creates an element of self-regulating dynamic within the judiciary, and at least puts limits on the judiciary just being kind of like a free-ranging de facto legislature. Because in this case, what is the standing? They're coming up with a kind of notional theoretical harm that they may face at some point in the future. And to the standing issue, it's not like most big cases just arise organically, right? The big civil rights cases in the mid 20th century, NAACP, found just the right person they wanted to kind of bring the case in behalf of. But their standing is pretty clear. And here, again, it's this highly theoretical. I may somehow be injured in the future, which shouldn't cut it. You should be able to find at least one example. But also in a broader sense, you sort of say, who are we talking about here? Is this really about a few doctors who might have something, or the people who the women who want to terminate a pregnancy, right? I mean, who is kind of at issue here? And that actually brought me to another question, and you and I were talking about this, not offline, but not as part of the pod yesterday. Um, and it seems here that this was another case where sort of the standing issue came up, and also what is implicated here are the fact that these doctors already have these protections, conscience protections, and the hypothetical that came up to me is, let's take mifepristone out of the thing. A doctor works in a pro-life doctor works in an emergency room. A woman comes in with a botched back alley abortion. Right. So the pregnancy is terminated, but now she's hemorrhaging. Right. So she is in a dire emergency situation. Does the pro-life doctor really say, "Hey, I can't help you. I'm really against abortion"? I mean, really? I mean, that's sort of. I mean, talking about Hippocratic oaths makes it very theoretical. But we give doctors a lot of money. We give them all sorts of social prestige, because when someone is in danger, you just jump in and you make them whole, or you do everything you can. And it seems like in this case, now this gets to the nature of these extremely early pregnancy terminations, and the sort of the nature of how these abortion drugs work, that it's a little unclear. But in a lot of these cases, if they really are talking about complications, the abortion's already happened. That pregnancy is over. What you're talking about is maybe there's some bleeding that needs to be addressed, or maybe it's one of the rare cases where there really does need to be medical intervention. But what is the argument for not providing care for that woman? The pregnancy is already terminated. It's this kind of weird point of principle that isn't really even a point of principle, and how they seem to have how the lawyers argued for this, that they had to kind of dodge, that they basically they change the definition and they say, well, it's completing an abortion. And I don't do abortions, so I'm not going to complete one. But again, you can see there that they're not willing to kind of address the case. The pregnancy's already terminated. You're not terminating anything. You're just preserving the person's health. So it's sort of another example of why, getting a little far afield here, but standing is there's a reason why that's a big issue. Not just
Yeah.
you kind of doing that other stuff.
And this case really underscores too, like, the kind of pseudoscience that's at the heart of the anti-abortion movement that they've been pretty successful in spreading, but that you really have to buy into to kind of understand this argument as anything more than, a religious one. Because there's the anti-abortion movement is kind of predicated on this idea that abortions are being done by careless women, willy-nilly, who aren't responsible enough to kind of take care of themselves or avoid this happening. And then they kind of sidle into a Planned Parenthood and they don't bother to take birth control. They just get abortions instead, right? But we know the reality of abortion is not like that. And if you had a situation where you had a woman coming to an emergency room because she needed an abortion, that's not the people who are taking mifepristone. Like, that's not a first trimester, very early on, very low complication. You take 2 pills and it's done with kind of thing. If a woman's in that kind of distress, odds are that's going to be one of those horrible cases where it's late in the pregnancy where something horrible is happening, or a miscarriage care or something of that nature. And the real question is, you have to ask an anti-abortion doctor who in this posture, like, well, what counts as an abortion? I mean, care for miscarriage and a quote unquote elective abortion are indistinguishable. Will you do one and not the other? Like, where's the moral line here? Is it different if the woman wanted to carry the pregnancy and it went astray versus if she didn't?
Well, let's go into this point specifically. If you can like expand on this, because what we're talking about here in miscarriage care is a case where you have a spontaneous miscarriage, but it sort of stops in process. So the pregnancy is ending, but it's sort of devolved into hemorrhaging, or it's kind of ending, but it hasn't. Well, you if you can go into that, because I'm not sure a lot of men understand that is kind of what you're talking about there with that kind of miscarriage care.
I mean, it comes to the same end of you need to, get usually the embryo, sometimes a fetus, out of the body, and that's what these medications do. They kind of usually mifepristone in conjunction with misoprostol, like the two things, that's what they do. I mean, it's medically the same. Like, there are some stories of women who like really, really, really wanted to bring their pregnancies to term, getting really upset when they see on their medical bills, abortion listed there because of all the kind of stigma and what we think of as abortion. But, I've done reporting about this before, that abortion is not just, a young woman who gets pregnant when she doesn't want to be and she goes to Planned Parenthood and ends it. Abortion is like a cornerstone of all kinds of different medical care, including beyond just reproductive health. It just pops up again and again. And so this idea that you can like silo off abortions that you find morally reprehensible as a doctor is just always been a fallacy. I like the more work I do in this space, the more I think it's like pretty insane that any doctor is allowed to be anti-abortion, or at least to act on that belief. Because I mean, the way you're describing, like, if a woman comes in with sepsis, from some kind of botched abortion, you don't have to treat her. Like, isn't that the whole point of what you're doing? And is that acceptable? If it's maybe, quote unquote, just caring for like hemorrhaging, and this came up again, and this came up in the arguments where Ketanji Brown Jackson was kind of grilling Holly and was like, what does it mean to be complicit in performing an abortion? Like, if you hand someone a water bottle, are you complicit? Like, what's the extent of the conscience here? And Holly kind of had to go back and say the the ending a kind of a quote unquote live abortion type thing, which, as we're getting into, I mean, this has always been part of the anti-abortion world, is like they're able to kind of fudge things with these sweeping moral claims that just glosses over the medical realities of what's going on here. And that was laid even more bare in this case because they didn't get to the merits very much during the Supreme Court oral arguments because the procedural stuff is so glaringly flawed. But in the lower courts, who kind of who were totally fine with the procedural stuff, so then did get to the merits. I mean, the bulk of it is all this weird double guessing of the steps the FDA went through to, prove that lifting these restrictions would not cause some big risk. And that's how you get to situations like Matthew Kacsmaryk kind of resting his opinion on multiple studies that have been retracted, on a web page full of anonymous blog posts. Like, it's just, it's ridiculous. And Alito tried a little bit to get into the medical stuff, to be like, surely lifting multiple restrictions at once would have unprecedented side effects. And they're like, well, no. And they tested for this. And it's also just kind of funny that, more than anything else, like mifepristone has been under probably more of a spotlight than like any other drug because it has political salience that most of them don't, which means that the FDA has always been too restrictive of it, putting too many barriers up to prevent people from getting it. Then and that's always been politically based. So, that's kind of how the case went. I mean, the other big thing I want to say about it is that Clarence Thomas clearly was kind of reading the writing on the wall. Kind of, you could tell that he knew this was not going anywhere. Like, this was a stinker. So he spent the rest of the arguments laying the groundwork for kind of the next mifepristone argument and doing this very Thomas thing where, we have to remember that he was kind of relegated to writing dissents for a long time of his career on the bench. He was the kind of big right-wing extremist who was always writing, at the very least kind of concurrences, being like, yes, and we should go further, or dissenting. And those ideas used to be considered so radical and kind of like to the right of where the court was. But now his beliefs are like the guiding principle of the court and kind of the mainstream of the conservative legal world, which is where this majority is coming from. So rather than do what Alito did, which is kind of like waste his breath fighting and punching for a while and then get tired and mopey and just like sit back and stop participating, he started sending up bat signals to the anti-abortion activists. And he brought up the Comstock Act over and over and over again, which is this 19th century anti-vice law, which prohibits, the mailing of abortifacients and the advertising of abortifacients that is laying totally dormant, for over a century, and then has now recently been kind of resuscitated by anti-abortion activists who love the idea that this law is on the books, right? You don't have to pass anything. You just need courts to start enforcing it. And there goes your mailed mifepristone, which is like a lifeline to especially women who are living in red states, who can set up kind of mail order systems and whatnot to fairly easily get the pills in. And which is also probably the number one obstacle to the anti-abortion mission of having abortion be illegal everywhere in the country. Now with telehealth and mailed mifepristone, I mean, that's almost impossible. Like, how are you going to stop people from getting these pills mailed? So the Comstock Act has kind of come into vogue, and Clarence Thomas talked about it over and over and over again, and when the manufacturer of Brandon mifepristone got up, he's like, you have a Comstock Act problem. Like, how are you getting around that? Just making it very clear that should any anti-abortion group kind of want to go right at mailed mifepristone via the Comstock Act, he's there for it. He's ready. He's amenable. Alito is ready. And even this case notwithstanding, you can't feel that confident that the rest of the justices will be like, what, an 1870s anti-vice law? Are you kidding me? Like, come on. Yeah, the quote unquote textualists, like, I don't think anyone would feel safe in that scenario.
Well, it's definitely, I mean, and to be fair to them, this is also a case where Congress should update the law, or
Mhm.
or get rid of the law. I mean, it is. I mean, that's sort of the strongest case for the antis in this instance, that it's kind of crazy that that kind of law is still on the books, but it is on the books, right? And that I think if and when the right wing justices do go in that direction, it's going to come. It's going to come to Congress, because this isn't the Constitution. Just pass another law, right? I think what this whole thing shows, and you can see that about the sort of scare tactics about mifepristone that Hawley was using. This and certainly the pro life movement sees this, is that these abortion pills are very safe. They can be, I mean, let alone that mifepristone's been on the market for like 20 years. We've been doing the mail thing now for a couple of years. I don't know, can't remember exactly when they did it, but something like a couple of years. You're not having like tons of women show up hemorrhaging in emergency rooms. It works. It's fine. It works in the sense of in the direct sense, but it also works in a safety context. And obviously, this is like kryptonite for the pro life movement, because it's certainly gonna be legal in blue states. The FDA, it's done and done in terms of the FDA. So and the all the issues where an abortion clinic, you can protest in front of it, you can take pictures of women going in, you can mobilize all of the sense of shame or feelings of invaded privacy and all that kind of stuff. But when you can just get it in the mail, and certainly for women in first couple months of a pregnancy, when it's a pretty straightforward thing, there's just nothing to grab onto. And you can see that that's why this there, because another thing that Kate and I discussed yesterday is I was actually at the gym and I was watching. They had MSNBC on, and they had Hawley on I believe with Katie Tur, and they were talking about this. And Hawley dashed off some statistics that were purporting to show how dangerous these drugs are, and how many complications there are. And the pro life folks have a lot of these statistics, and they're a mix of just fake statistics or ones that are highly misleading. And it's a problem for them, because science has come up with a way of doing this that is private and safe. So all the secondary things that has given the pro life movement a lot of traction, kind of saying, oh, the baby could be, the baby could live with a C-section, and here you are aborting it, which obviously all the things surrounding that, or this is the equivalent of back alley abortions, and these women are going to be dying, or they can't have babies anymore, and all this kind of stuff kind of takes that all away. Simple taking a couple pills, uh, you know, 8 weeks into the pregnancy, and done and done. And you can see it really is kind of kryptonite, and potentially that Dobbs becomes not a kind of a Pyrrhic victory. I mean, obviously you still have all the cases of mid pregnancy health complications and birth defect, all that kind of stuff. But it for the vast majority of pregnancies, it really threatens to just make Dobbs kind of as I said, kind of a semi hollow victory.
And this kind of goes without saying at this point, but I just want to reinforce so much of the anti-abortion movement has been couched in concern for women. This idea that you're endangering them and you don't care, and you know this very paternalistic idea of like, yeah, she has to go see a doctor 800 times before she can get the medication, and she needs to get an ultrasound so she sees what it looks like before she decides. And it's always been that way. And it's no different with this case too. They're pretending like the FDA was flagrantly irresponsible and endangering women because it just doesn't care. And Alito had this hilarious portion where he was grilling Danko is the company that makes Mifepristone. He was grilling the Danko lawyer about what is your injury here, like aside hilarious after he kind of took the doctor's argument hook, line, and sinker. And he got the Danko person basically is like, well, we sell Mifepristone, so being able to sell less Mifepristone is, and Alita's like, so it's money. It's just money, which, refreshingly dismissive from a right wing justice to
Normally,
not
that's considered
concern.
a pretty big injury.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, let me ask you this: is Mifepristone under patent? Are they just or is it not under patent and they're just the primary producer of it in the U.S.?
Yeah, they make Mifeprex, the branded version. Someone else
Okay.
makes the generic kind. But so just to wrap the point there, this is always cloaked beneath concern for women, just looking out for women. But there have been enough studies now that we know being forced to carry a pregnancy that you don't want worsens your outcomes in every way. So, that's never what this has been about. It's the quest to make abortion illegal everywhere. And it seemed that this particular onslaught was too weak even for this court. And to some degree, even though I think there's no question that the majority is ideologically aligned with the anti-abortion movement, I do think there was some political upside in the idea of post Dobbs, ruling in favor of the abortion rights side and doing a whole. I don't know what you guys are talking about. We are so impartial here.
Yeah, there's definitely, as you said, I think that this is something we're going to be dealing with as a country for at least a number of years, which is that the Supreme Court is going to be a place where, if it is even in the realm of reasonable, you're going to get the Republican parties, you know, ruling. And the question comes in the cases where it's just too much, right? Is the president 100% immune from all criminal prosecutions forever? Well, I think we're going to see, they're happy to delay it for Trump, but they're not going to, that's just too much. And in this case, or like, sort of like, are you retired doctor who's not practicing anymore? Do you need to be protected for some time? A woman may come in complaining of bleeding because she used this sometime. Is that standing? Like, come on, it's too much. And but as you said, it's sort of a bit of a twofer. It can kind of be like John Roberts with the ACA in that big case. I guess it's 10 years ago now, where he kind of tax penalty. He kind of but that's kind of where we are. But as you said, it certainly seems like it was a bit much, but it also, frankly, it does raise the question of, how did this case get cert? Why are they even hearing it? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
four, right? You need four justices to, and it's certainly, we know the two.
Yep.
we know where the two came from, but it does seem like it's a bit of a question where they got the other two from. I guess that maybe that is a case where, I don't know, Barrett, just for old time's sake, wanted to you know give them a go, even though it was, let them come to the stadium, even though if they're not going to come out with a
Exactly.
win. I have no idea, but there you go.
So, moving right along, we have some other stuff to get to. There have been pretty major developments on the Trump trial front. One of those being that a date was set in the hush money case out of New York that our listeners will remember now for a while been seeming like the only one that, or at least the one that has the best chance of getting started and finished before the election. There's a chance maybe some of the others will at least start before the election, but this has for a while now become kind of the front runner. And there was a blip in that case somewhat recently where for some just truly, unintelligible reason, the Southern District of New York like took forever to hand over documents and had a bunch that they didn't hand over. And so when they did, it was, even Bragg was like, well, we got to go through these now. I don't know why they didn't give it to us before. And of course, Trump is like, and we should delay 10 years to do that. So there was, all the anguish that came with that, this idea that, oh my God, is this one going to get pushed back too? And he's not going to reach the end of any of the 4 trials before his election. But that, fantasy on Trump's side and kind of nightmare for everyone else came to an end on Monday when Judge Juan Marchand in this case kind of got pretty snippy at the Trump lawyers in these attempts to delay it, and kind of scolded them for implying that this delay in document handing over was part of some greater conspiracy, and now they need lots of time to kind of sift through all of that. And the judge is saying, you're accusing me of being complicit in that as well. He asked one of Trump's lead lawyers, like, you've been a federal prosecutor before, right? Kind of implying, how this works. You could have asked for these same documents months ago. There's no reason to kind of wait for the DA's office on this. And he set the beginning of that trial to start April 15th, which is not so bad with this delay because previously it was going to be March 25th. So especially in the context of Trump trials, that's like, it's not a too big a deal, like we'll take it.
Yeah, there was this case had this oddity of, we're almost kind of about to swear in the jurors, metaphorically, not literally, and suddenly the feds just say, oh, here's some other stuff. And it's this trove of new documents. And if we had a Republican White House, it would just be sort of obvious. This is, just transparent, funny business to screw with the schedule. And it was so weird that some people were saying maybe it is funny business. I mean, that's pretty hard to argue for that, given that it's a Democratic administration. I saw some people even saying maybe there's just some weird thing in the Southern District, some burrowed in pro-Trump people who are playing games here. Anything's possible, seems unlikely. Sometimes things just happen. But as you said, the judge was, and it brings up something here, which is, I think, if we ever, well, it's happening because of all these, pretrial motions and delays and everything, but will certainly come up even more when some of these trials hopefully actually come to trial, which is there is this basic difference. We have become very accustomed in recent years, in some ways through all of our history, that in the political realm, you can just say total bullshit. Things are total bullshit. And the only lit on that is people's unwillingness to believe your bullshit. But in a courtroom, it's very different. If you say things that are not true and are not true, you can get in trouble for that. There are things that lawyers are not allowed to do. Now, obviously, in practice, there's you get some leeway, and defense attorneys definitely have the ability to poke holes and blah 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 blah. But what you had in this case, the one you just referenced, is the defense attorneys basically coming in with this whole conspiracy between the Southern District and the local prosecutors and the judge. And the judge said, dude, what the fuck? You really going to come into my courtroom and accuse me of being part of a conspiracy to deprive you of your rights? And then when they called him on it, you see the Trump lawyer basically, sorry, judge. I mean, you see when these guys get get brought to heel. But yeah, this is coming to trial, and it's always been seen as the poor relation of Trump trials, right? The kind of the Rodney Dangerfield of the big four. But it's still a criminal trial, and there actually really is an issue here. We forget one of Trump's lackeys went to jail over this. So you really can't say, this is bullshit. Well, Trump's DOJ sent Michael Cohen to prison over this. So, I mean, that speaks for itself. You can say there's judgment issues on the margins, but you can't say it's made up. And then on the other big Trump news this week, the civil case, also in New York State, Tish James case, where you had this basically $450 million judgment. It came down to the day when New York was going to at least be able to start the process of confiscating Trump's property and selling it at auction. That suddenly an appeals court in New York said, well, let's do half, half, and you got 10 more days. It's not exactly half. It was 175, but I think if we go back, remember, it was actually 350 and then like 100 million in interest. So I think the logic of 175 was basically, let's set the interest aside. Let's say 50 cents on the, 50 cents haircut, for lack of a better word, for the bond, and you have 10 days. So now he has he has to come up with $175 million bond, sort of yet again one of these cases where everybody who's waiting for Trump to face justice is throwing up their hands again. He always gets away, blah, 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 blah. And, kind of, I get that. It's not totally clear to me that that's where this is going. 175 million is still a lot. And what I have learned, I'm not going to pretend that I was really versed on the, high dollar court bond industry. But as we have learned about it, basically, no one is in the business of securing bonds like this for over $100 million. That's the limit. No one goes over that. They can, but even if you have the collateral, no one kind of does that. No one's in that business. So to get any bond over $100 million, you've got to convince some underwriter to kind of go outside of their normal model. That's one. And it's still not crystal clear to me that he actually has the collateral to get one for $175 million. Now there's this, I mean, it's no accident that Trump came out of reality TV, because these are definitely reality TV type plot twists. But you suddenly have that his faux company, Truth Social, has suddenly gone public. So he now has additional paper assets of at least hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, from this basically what is a meme stock. So maybe everything is solved for Trump. That's it. The problem is, though, there's several problems. One is that, at least on paper for now, that's all locked up for 6 months. He controls the board, so he could probably undo that. But the other issue is, and I want to digress momentarily on this. We've had these things, meme stocks. GameStop was one. There's been a few others where people on Reddit kind of just create a flurry of people buying stocks for a company that clearly has no value. And it's kind of one part viral trend on TikTok and one part sort of a game of chicken. Like, yeah, I know it's worthless, but I'm going to buy it. I think I'm going to get out while there's still some dumb money out there. So I'm going to make money. Yeah, it's worthless, but I'm going to make money, and someone else is going to lose everything. That's really what this company is. One thing that is, we talked about, the trials and tribulations of running a media company. One thing I found out, Truth Social's total revenue is just about exactly the same as the total revenue of TPM. Us. We bring in the same amount of revenue. their expenses, Trump's expenses, are almost 20 times as high. And this social network has like almost an order of magnitude fewer people who use it than like any other social network that's ever gone public. So this thing is a joke. And so the question is, um, can you really find an underwriter who's going to take who's going to take that stock as collateral? That would be crazy. Somehow you would have to do it where Trump is going to be able to unload that stock without crashing the stock. So there's all these kind of just totally weird, crazy things that are absurd that we're even having to talk about them. But that's kind of, that was the week in Trump judicial procedures. And I'll just say this again, I'm not totally sure we're not going to end up back at the same place in 10 days, that he still can't come up with a bond.
So for now, Tish James is kind of at least kept for a little over a week from, putting up his properties at a fire auction or whatever. And then, I think the concern here is a little bit that people wanted to see that happen because it would be embarrassing to him, and a little bit that the decision to lower the bond is perhaps indicative of the idea that this appellate panel of judges thinks that the lower court ruling was too punitive across the board. Maybe a concern that when the appeal does happen, they'll be inclined to, remove or kind of lower some of the other punishments. But it's too early to tell. We'll keep an eye. They only, as you say, it's still a ton of money. They only give them 10 days to come up with it. So at least they're not kind of participating in the, let's push this back by 18 months type charade. So that's where we are with the Trump trial updates. And then, we want to move on to this other news that was a pretty big surprise out of New Jersey, where we had Andy Kim, who announced the day the charges against Menendez were unveiled that he was going to run for the seat. And it was kind of, it was ballsy at the time because Democrats had not figured out where they were going to stand on this yet. There's always a concern when the Senate is as tight as it is about alienating Menendez, who you need his vote. And I think that you can still see that, right? Like Schumer still refuses to kind of touch this with a 10-foot pole. He doesn't want to lose, a vote for Biden judges, and probably all the more so now that Manchin's come out with this 11th hour idiocy about how he won't vote for any judicial nominees that don't have any Republican buy-in. But that's been the dynamic there, right? Andy Kim kind of got in early. He had some degree of kind of national prominence, mostly because that photo that went around of him, on his hands and knees in his suit, kind of sweeping up after the insurrection, bounced around everywhere, and has maintained some like thematic consistency with his candidacy, which is kind of predicated on this idea that he is he's a good guy who's kind of powered by grassroots energy. And this is particularly striking because New Jersey is one of these machine states, right? That this weird system where if you win the kind of the county endorsement, you get put on this endorsed candidate line on the ballot that's way higher up than the unendorsed candidate line. So it's a huge boon. And that came to a head because before long, Tammy Murphy jumped into the race, the wife of the current governor of New Jersey, who had never held a political office before, and in fact was like a Republican for kind of a long time. But the political calculus there was pretty clear, right? Like the governor is going to help get her the endorsement from all these county parties, and then she's on the line, and Andy Kim doesn't really matter that much. So he did lodge a challenge against the ballot, saying it's unconstitutional. And the New Jersey Attorney General, appointed by Governor Murphy, was like, yeah, it sucks. I'm not going to defend it in court. And that was kind of a death blow to Tammy Murphy's candidacy because it put in really stark relief that she's kind of the Nepo baby candidate here, that the governor thought he could kind of gift her the Senate seat. And Kim was because he jumped in so early, I mean, he was there as the alternative, right? For people who were like, "Well, this is icky, I don't much like this. She should have at least have to work for what it's basically a lifetime appointment, a New Jersey Senate seat. As a Democrat, you don't get knocked out of that unless you've got gold bars, stuffed down your pants." So all of this kind of came to a head. And then she, surprisingly, the day after Menendez said he's not going to be in the primary, but, harbors hopes of running as an independent, she dropped out. She said, um, this is an important election. I wouldn't feel comfortable kind of using my resources doing internecine warfare with another Democrat. She kind of alluded to the ballot controversy, saying she doesn't really want to get embroiled in that, and she bowed out, which all but certainly means that Andy Kim is going to be the next senator from New Jersey.
It's a remarkable story, and I will, I give her credit. I didn't have a perfect handle on what the odds were here, but I certainly had the sense that Kim was going to win, and the only way she could win was basically just going like full scorched earth against him. And even then, I don't think it was going to make it. I don't think she could have pulled it off. And she said what she said, and sure, it's self-interest at some level. Didn't it? She could see the writing on the wall, but lots of people see the writing on the wall and still keep fighting forever. So give her some credit. But and I will say this. And look, I have no brief for her. I think it's in context only fair to make the point that as ridiculously corrupt as the machine system is in New Jersey, that every other politician in New Jersey has either used it or at least um, either got into office with it or at least operated within it. So she didn't invent this machine. This is the machine that brings you New Jersey politicians, and the other New Jersey politicians. Some of them are machine people, some of them aren't. Menendez was the classic machine guy, but they've all worked within it because that's the system, and it's remarkable to me that Andy Kim just made a series of he just played this perfectly. Remember, when you get into that race, you're giving up your house seat. So that's not nothing, right? You're really kind of betting your career on it. He
Which he
he
flipped in 2018. So it's not like it was a slam dunk seat.
Exactly. He kind of bet everything, and he got in right at the beginning and I think the key here is that he got in before the machine realized that Menendez was toast. And because they did not realize Menendez was toast, they weren't lining up a new person to replace him. And in the time it took the machine guys to figure out that he was toast and start thinking about who's our next choose your fighter, who's our player. He had already raised enough money, he had gotten enough momentum, and he had sort of embraced the anti-machine thing enough that yes, he had this case where, and I suspect the courts will say the line is unconstitutional, but he had built up enough momentum that he was actually making a good fight of it within the machine system. I mean, not getting the bosses, not getting their assent, but actually going in and fighting in those individual county conventions. And, there are some that are a little more machiney than others and stuff. So it's a pretty remarkable thing because, it's not that no one had thought of like fighting the machine before. Lots of people have tried. They tend to be sort of, kind of, left-leaning reformist types, and they all get shut down because it's really tough. But again, the particular dynamics of this and that he kind of got a jump on the machine made this one a little different. And I I doubt the machine is gonna last in its, at least in its current form, after this. And again, just it's just such a funny thing because it's, until, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, they still had plural office holding in New Jersey, which is one of these hallmarks of very corrupt political systems. That's where kind of like you're like, I'm mayor of Newark, and I also represent Newark in the state legislature. Right. I mean, it's just like, what? And it's all these things that used to exist in, like, sort of rotten boroughs, like in the 18th century and stuff in England, that they still have them in New Jersey. So it's a cool story, kind of like, Menendez was a reliable vote on the big things, but he was kind of notoriously corrupt. He beat a big felony indictment a few years back, that, he was acquitted. So, fair's fair. But, generally speaking, when you're indicted on that kind of thing and acquitted, you probably didn't have your nose totally clean, even if maybe, you shouldn't be convicted. And I think his Senate colleagues kind of thought like he'd keep his nose clean after that close call, but he's like back a couple years later with even more ridiculous stuff. So I don't know, kind of a cool story out of New Jersey. A guy who does seem like pretty clean and legit and just a solid guy managed to kind of, beat Goliath.
And it's just such a cinematic narrative, he beat the machine and, like, is gonna, by all odds, kind of win the seat of the most corrupt member we've seen in a while, so,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
good for
it's
Kim.
a feel
Fortune
good
favored the
story. Feel
bold
good
here.
story.
Yeah.
Yep, totally, totally.
And so we're gonna end today's show with, as Josh put it, some green sprouts in the polling that seem to indicate that winds are shifting in Biden's favor. And I think probably or at least the buzziest tranche in there is the Bloomberg Morning Consult bunch of they just did a bunch of the kind of swing states that'll decide the election. So the Rust Belt few, and then Nevada and Georgia, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but I think in the Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan bundle, it was kind of like, Biden was, I think, up a couple points in Pennsylvania, had moved into more or less of a tie in the other two. The only real outlier in this set is that he went down in Georgia by I think a point from last month in this polling set. But this set kind of like encapsulated what a smattering of other polls have shown, particularly kind of post State of the Union, which seemed to indicate Democrats kind of coming home to Biden a bit more, and moving a lot of these polls into kind of dead tie, or maybe one or the other of them is like up a point or two, which is essentially a tie.
Yeah, I mean, any one of these polls, in most cases, they're within the margin of error. Remember, margin of errors are like 3 points, so that could be, anything from +3 to -3 is within the margin of error. So any one of these polls is, doesn't really necessarily tell us anything, may not even represent an actual difference. But there have been a number of polls over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, about since the State of the Union, that show a little movement in Biden's direction. So, for people who are obsessing, I think we need to see more to see if this is more than the kind of, the natural ebb back and forth. I suspect it is the beginning of some movement. I don't think we've seen enough to know that. But one thing that it has been the case throughout this 2024 cycle, which obviously has been going on, in fact, for a year or so, is that Biden has been, for 4, 5, 6 months, been pretty consistently down on average 2, 3, maybe 4 points in national horse race polls. But what is telling is that in most of these cases, Trump is ahead, but he is at the place that he was pretty much in 2016 and 2020. 46%, 47%. And Biden is down in the mid or even low 40s. Um, there are lots of reasons to think that that is Trump's cap, that he really struggles to get above the mid high 40s. And so the issue there is that the issue is in the Democratic coalition. That Democratic coalition is fractured. Now, the bad news is you're down 2 to 4 points, and that is what it is. And you certainly have the third party candidates out there who are happy to sop up that, to kind of collect up the pieces of the fractured Democratic coalition. But it also tells you that it is kind of in Biden's camp, in his, on his part of the playing field, that there is a coalition that can be reassembled. Doesn't mean it will be reassembled, but it can. Whereas again, Trump, I think he's about maxed out. So one of the reasons that I think this is probably the beginning of some trend is precisely that he does seem to be reassembling some of that coalition. And that's probably because, again, the things we've been talking about forever, which is that up until quite recently, a lot of people thought it was this totally open question who the nominees were going to be, right? And that's by definition low information voters, since it's been crystal clear forever who the nominees were going to be. But remember, the people we're talking about are the people who are not paying that close attention. That's probably part of it. I think his State of the Union is part of it, kind of energized people in the Democratic coalition. So, again, I would just say there's some hints there might be some movement. I wouldn't really call it much more than that for now. But, if you're interested in my personal opinion, I suspect it is the beginning of a tightening, some move in Biden's direction. We'll have to keep an eye out to see, just where that takes things.
And the other factor I just want to add into what you said about kind of why the polls might be moving is also kind of in conjunction with his State of the Union performance. His campaign also used that as that was the starting gun for their kind of general election campaigning. So since then they've started spending serious money on advertising, on kind of staffing up in the swing states, sending the surrogates to fan out across the country. So we're also just we're in the general election now where we haven't been before. And I think we've talked a lot about this show about how it kind of makes sense that a primary landscape favors Trump more than it does Biden, right? Like that's how you make it into a referendum campaign. And even though Trump is something more akin to an incumbent, he could have that posture of like, look how I'm smoking the other challengers, right? And in the head to head, that was always going to be just a more kind of naturally favorable landscape for Biden, where you've got just a more normie audience, and it's Trump is not kind of playing off of other Republicans. He's having to stand on his own 2 feet a little bit more. And, that's just been intensified by his recent kind of flood of like deranged comments that, as we talked about last episode, are also being covered more and covered in a more negative way than they were up till this point.
Right. And, another thing, and David Kurtz actually flagged this in today's morning memo. As always, we're recording this on Wednesday, March 27th. But what is more indicative of the polls is that Trump is now back to stop the steal. Mm-hmm. He's now back to saying 2024 is rigged too. So you always know that is, that is the sort of the acid test. When Trump starts saying how it's being stolen from him and he may not accept the results of the election, doesn't mean he's losing, but he's a little more focused on that the votes may not be there for him. So he has to go back to, again, I mean, this is what he did in 2016. It's what he did in 2020 and had to follow through on because he did lose. So, we'll see. But, for those of you who've been kind of hanging on the ledge, a little kind of, sprinkling of campaign holy water to at least calm you down. Although certainly not saying that that anybody is out of the woods yet. And I think that's all we got. We had a lot of stuff to cover. That's
Yep.
all. And remember, become a member of TPM. We're here during our drive. Definitely stop by talkingpointsmemo.com, and we will talk to you next week.
See you then.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.